Broadcasting live from Youngville, North Carolina and Ontario, Canada, this is Got Mead Live, a weekly show where Vicky Rowe and AJ Aramits bring you the mead news, meadery info, and mead-making discussions from all over, talking with mead makers, mead owners, industry mavens, and influencers. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly podcast about mead and the people who love it and where the mead world is going. And now here are your hosts, Got Mead owner Vicky Rowe and mead and wine maker AJ Aramits.
Hi, gang. We're back after a month's hiatus. Yes, we were, tired. We were really, really tired. And, yeah. And I have lost my page. What the hell did I do here? All right, let's do this here.
Vicky's having a moment.
Vicky's
Live
having a moment.
from the den of the puppies of the apocalypse, the
Hamish
Bunny
has
Pen in
got it.
Ottawa, Canada,
There it is.
Melbourne down under, except that he's currently in New York City with Bobby. Ryan's Pad in Denver, and the TARDIS in Miami. It's Got Mead Live. Welcome to the show. We do this on our own time and for free because we're all awesome and stuff, but the software, the hardware, and the storage all cost money. So we hope you'll consider becoming a supporting patron member. It's just $30 a year, and you get access to much more on gotmead.com. Only a little over 50 cents a week. Gets you access to the Patrons Board, Got Mead Forum, and the Patron Facebook group, and all the award-winning recipes contained in the Patrons areas.
That was pretty good, Ham.
Show links. You can listen live on the Got Mead website, or if you're mobile and want to listen later, check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, or TuneIn Radio at tunein.com. Search for Got Mead Live. Replays back to the beginning of the show are available on gotmead.com, Spreaker.com, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher Radio. Just search Got Mead Live. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com, Twitter at Got Mead Now, and mead making back to basics. Check the links on gotmead.com. Call us today on 803-443-MEAD. What are we drinking tonight, AJ?
I have got a bottle of Hawk Knob Reserve Cider from last year's competition that I brought home and never got to drinking, because I really have a brewing problem, not a drinking problem.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of comforted that it tastes rather a lot like the apple that I brought to share with everybody at the Mazer Cup. So, I think I must be on the right track if what I'm making is tasting like what people are actually selling. So, I'm not sure what honey they used or exactly what apples they used, but it does say it's bourbon barrel aged, and I can sort of pick that out in the flavor of it. But it's overall quite pleasant. You know me, I would always rather things be a little bit sweeter, but it's still pretty nice.
Yeah.
Vicky, what are you drinking?
I'm sticking with water tonight. I've had a headache all day, and alcohol on top of a headache is generally a really bad idea. So, yeah, I've been fighting it with aspirin, and there's only so much I can take, so I'm just kind of going, fine, water, whatever. It's annoying, but there you go. What about you, Ryan?
Well, so I oftentimes will make a prune mel, and they just taste wonderful. I took a little bit off of one of the batches. Exactly. He said it'll keep you regular.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's what I thought you said. And I was like, did I hear it right?
Right. And so I broke a little batch off, and I bought a bottle of grappa a while back. I'd never experienced grappa before, and I didn't really appreciate it in its raw state. And so actually what I started playing with and what I'm drinking currently as we speak is I took some grappa and mixed it with some honey, and then I added that into my prune mel, and it's pretty dry. It's probably 10.4 or 10.5. It's got a good bit of alcohol. I guess you could call it fortified, couldn't you? So anyway, it's something quite different than what I've ever had before, but I'm actually liking it quite a lot, and I got a good hunch that we'll be playing with this type of a thing here in the near future.
It sounds pretty interesting. I mean, I'm not a big fan of grappa, and the prune mill, I like plums, so I'm withholding judgment on that until or if I taste it. But the idea of mixing the two is interesting. I've learned never to diss on any flavor combination that sounds weird to me because more often than not I discover that they're like, wow, that's really interesting. That really works. So I don't judge anymore because I've been surprised too many times, and it's like, okay, fine. I'm just going to assume it's good until I find out otherwise.
Well, you might appreciate that prunes actually do give you a lot of that plum piece because, of course, that's kind of where they come from, and so I like it, and almost everybody that I share it with just thinks it's fabulous. So it's really not. And you know what I call it when I enter it in a competition? It's called "This Isn't Your Grandpa's Prune Juice."
Oh my gosh, that's pretty good.
Although I still think there was one mead title better than that at the competition.
Yeah, I stole Carmen's
recipe. Oh yeah, that was great.
That was awesome.
I had one that accidentally, so I signed onto the sign up board to buy my entry spots basically, and then I went back later to fine tune them and then print them, and that solidifies your entries then at that point. And I didn't realize while I was in a rush to buy my spots before we ran out of time, I was struggling with one, and I ended up putting in there, what the hell, right? And I overlooked that when I printed my labels, and so that was one of the first place medals that I won, and was called "What the Hell."
What the hell?
And it was funny, but it was totally by accident because I was stressing when I was trying to fill out my entry sheet.
Yeah, you did all right with that one. I think I saw that in the medal count, didn't I?
Yes, that was one of two that I took home this year. I was a little bit disappointed that I took home two. I mean, geez, anymore to take home anything from the Mazer Cup is just a phenomenal, statement. The competition has gotten so high, but I actually had hoped for four, to be honest with you. And so when I took two, I was a little bit disappointed. But the Mazer people did such an amazing job this year. As you guys know, we were able to go up and get our score sheets after the awards banquet. And so as soon as I opened that up, I noticed that I had 6 meats that were pushed into the mini boss. And so that made me then realize, especially when I saw the scores that I got on the ones that were pushed that didn't even win a medal, that's just really a statement of how difficult the competitions are becoming, especially, at the Mazer Cup. So,
well, yeah, it's a Super Bowl.
Anyway, in lieu of that, congratulations to all you guys out there that actually took home some hardware, and even honorable mentions, as they said from the podium. I think Peter mentioned this, that probably most everything that just got pushed into the mini bosses are good enough to take home hardware in other competitions. So it's gotten very difficult, and congratulations to all you guys.
Yeah, we had some really good ones out there. Hamish, what are you and Bobby drinking since you're hanging with Bobby tonight?
Well, actually, I'm having a farmhouse fermented dry cider, and I've been working on my segues. So this is one made by Dinah Brew Co.
That's who we have on tonight.
Exactly. So
yeah.
It's a lovely very dry cider. It's got some really good apple on the nose, and the palate is clean enough that I would really like to be sitting outside in the sun about this time of year back home. Drinking this, I think it would be just spectacular.
It's a little cooler than that where you're at now.
Yeah, well, that's all right. We got the heat on inside.
Yeah, and it's a nice living room with lots of windows.
Yeah, it's going down just nicely, so
yeah.
that's all well and good.
That's
so,
cool.
Who are we having on tonight, Vicky?
We have Chris Sheldon, who is owner of Diner Brewing, the cider that you're drinking. And it's a cidery in New York. Bobby hooked us up with Chris. Chris makes one of the interesting things that Bobby had pointed out to me is Chris makes a cider with umami notes to it. It's actually got I hate it when I draw blank, Bobby Elf. Oh God. Miso soup. It's got miso in it. He's got a cider with miso in it, and all of his ciders are dry. So, and he makes I think he's got 12. But anyway, they're all really dry, all using, he likes to use wilder apples, so more like crab apple. So AJ, you'll really like this, because I know you like your crab apples. And, but he says that your traditional cider apples are kind of boring. And so he's looking for exciting apple combinations. He's really kind of taking the mold out. He's got one that I want to try that's got coriander and something else in it. And the article was saying IPA drinkers might like that one. I'm going, it's got coriander in it. Lots of people will like it, So we should get him in here. And, he can tell us more about what he's doing. But I was reading their articles on their website. It was pretty cool. I got to go. In fact, I was in such a hurry today I didn't hook it up, so I'll hook up the website links on the page. Okay, so let's go ahead and add him.
So while you're doing that, I recently had a trip upstate here in New York and visited a really awesome distillery making bourbon, and it's called Hill Rock Distillery, and I just want to have a big shout out to the guys there who gave me a tour and a taste of all their stuff and all that stuff. So it was really good.
Chris, hey, you made it in. Welcome to Got Me Live.
Yeah, I did. Thanks for having me.
Hamish was just extolling one of your local breweries. Hamish, what's the name of the place again?
Not a brewery. It's
distillery. Sorry, yeah, you said that.
Which one?
Yeah, Hill Rock Estate Distillery. And the one thing I really liked about it during the tour, I discovered that they were one of the very few, if not the only one left in the state, distillery in the state who actually goes from farm to bottle. So they actually grow all of their own grains. They malt their own grains, they dry and smoke their own grains, and then they mash their own grains, and then they distill it, and it's all on the one premises. And it was really cool to see the entire process from go to woe. And some of the stuff they've got is some really, really fine whiskeys there. So I was quite impressed. It's possibly the best bourbon I've ever had.
Yeah, it's a really good bourbon. I've used some of their barrels for some of my ciders actually in the past. So they really do have a nice character to them. Lots of caramel notes there.
Ooh, that would be nice. Apple and caramel.
They're not using the 10-gallon. Unfortunately, they're not using the 10-gallon barrels anymore. Those little barrels, so they've upsized. So it's going to be a bit hard to get handy barrels from them now.
Right, makes it a little harder for the home brewing unit.
Yeah. So Chris, tell us a little bit about Diner Brewing. Because I don't know how many people are going to know you guys out there, and I think they're going to want to.
Yes. Thanks for the platform to let people know, and spread the good word about my cidery and brewery. Diner Brew, I get a lot of questions about it. The reason for Brew Co. is because I wanted to have one in-house name for multiple commodity types. So I'm really a cider maker by trade, but also a brewer. Cider is really my number one passion in the alcohol world, but I love making beer. I also distill, and eventually plan on adding a distilling end to the business. So, thus Brew Co. Yes. It's I love making apple brandies actually, and a couple generations back, my dad, who is French, his family used to make eau de vie.
Nice.
I'm trying to do some historical research and go back and talk to the family members and see what kind of apples they were using and try and recreate the product. We have some old bottles from the old farm, and they're really wonderful. They have this nice butterscotch quality that I think came from aging in used wine barrels. And I'm trying to figure out which type of wine they use so that I can kind of recreate this butterscotch note that I've never tried another eau de vie that has something like it. I'm leaning toward they were in a region called the Sarthe, which is just above the Loire Valley. Little known, but the third largest apple producing region in France. And they obviously would be using barrels similar. I think it was a white wine barrel from the color of the eau de vie, and something similar to like a Sancerre or Vouvray. So I'm trying to find Vouvray and Sancerre barrels, make some eau de vie, and age it in those to try and recreate this familial product.
Wow. Cool.
That is some really cool history.
Yeah. It really is, yeah.
But yeah, no, that's so Diner is mostly a cidery right now. We're putting out a ton of different ciders. I think, Vicky, you might have one of my dry ice ciders.
I
that
do.
Blue bottle that Bobby with you.
Is that the blue one?
That's the blue one, yeah.
Okay, I had the blue one, and it just says, it looks like it says, oh, something FCC on the top. There's no label on it otherwise. I don't know what that means.
My handwriting is so bad, I'm not surprised you can't read it. But
I figured it was Bobby's bad writing, so I kind of already blame Bobby, actually.
It's mine. I'm guilty. Even the guy who works in my shop has me like type everything out just so he can read the recipes. My poor family. But yeah, it's a dry ice cider. And did you get a chance to try it?
No, I'm going to open it right now. It took me a while to find the bloody bottle. Between the stuff coming home from the Mazer Cup and the stuff that I brought back with, I mean, literally 2 weeks before the Mazer, I was up there.
Right.
And it's just been sitting in the middle of the living room, and I haven't put anything away yet.
I'm sure you have a ton of bottles.
So I am opening it now. It's nicely fizzy.
Well, while she's opening that, let's jump you onto a different topic. I'm currently drinking your Farmhouse Fermented Dry Cider. What can you tell me about that one?
Oh, okay. So my Cider des Huguenots, I named that after the Huguenots who settled my hometown in New Rochelle down here in Lower Westchester. French expats who came over here. They were known for their orcharding culture. Actually, there are 3 cultivars of pears that claim New Rochelle as their cultivar origin. Churchland, let me think, the Parsonage, the Churchland, and we have one more, and it's escaping my memory right now. But anyways, we have a really long history in Neuro of this French kind of cider making tradition. So because I do a farmhouse fermentation, which I utilize yeast that I've gathered in the St. Lawrence River Valley for that one, my grandparents are up there in the upstate part of New York. And I was fortunate enough to get some unpasteurized juice from that region, let it ferment naturally, gather the culture at the bottom, freeze it. I take scrapings from it and create a yeast starter with it every time I want to do another batch of that cider. But it makes a wonderful cider. It's it's a fast fermenter. It's kind of my Franco-American hybrid. I try and hearken to the French farmhouse process, while using techniques that don't allow too much acetobacter content to get in there, so not too much natural vinegarization within the cider, keep it very wine-like, use apples with nice bitterness content from the Hudson Valley to try and keep it traditional. But I call it a Franco-American hybrid because most French ciders would not traditionally be dry, and I prefer all of my ciders to be very dry. So that culture is really nice because it actually will ferment like a champagne yeast, take my ciders up to over 7% actually. What you're drinking is 7.3% alcohol, and it's this kind of like new world, old world cider in a combination that I like to kind of tip my cap to my hometown for the name.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I mean, yeah, it's just dry, but I've had some very dry ciders in my time. It doesn't taste terribly dry. It's got a very a sweet. Fresh apple nose on it, and the palate is just apple. But then, yeah, it just runs away, and it's just dry enough that I'd like to be drinking it on a hot day back home. I think this would be a wonderful summer drink. I just like to sit outside.
I can't wait for the summer season. Yeah, this is going to be great during the summer. I think all of our ciders are going to sell really well during the spring and summer.
This one will.
Traditionally, I guess it's a good time to be drinking cider. That's when I like to have it too.
Christmas for us is all about drinking white wine in the sun. So I think this would be an awesome substitute.
Where are you coming from?
Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, that makes sense. That's cool.
Nice. Joe Abruzzo, one of our listeners, is asking, "Are you guys?" He lives in the general vicinity, and he's asking, "Are you tasting room only, or do you have the facilities there as well?"
Actually, we're the opposite of that, Joe. We're just a production facility right now. I actually cater my kind of tastings to tours set up in advance for groups of 5 or more. I do the tours for free. We do sampling along the way. and then I'll pour growler fills or what have you, let you buy bottles when you come in-house. But I do that by appointment only right now because I'm in a small facility. We're just a startup. We're 5 months old, so really we're packing our facility full to the brim with equipment just to be able to meet our demand at this point. And it's been great to kind of get such a rush of demand and production just at the start. But because of that, we've had to think about the best way to use our space. So we kind of make sure that we have enough room for production. We will have people in. If you're a real cider fan and you want to come by, please do reach out. You can find my contact on dinerbrewco.com. All over the internet. We're on Instagram, Facebook. Feel free to reach out in whatever way you want if you want to shoot me a message and set something up. But as of right now, we're mostly just a production facility.
Well, he says he says that's actually great because he wants to bring a cider into the restaurant he works at.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I think you'll be hearing from him.
So all you need to do is
Yeah.
find 4 friends, Joe, and you're away.
There you go.
We've got retail across Westchester County. It was kind of my goal setting this thing up to really put our stamp on Westchester County. We have had hyper-local distribution, all self-distribution so far, which we're very fortunate in New York State that they allow us to, through the farm brewing, distilling, what have you. It's a farm alcohol producers law, lets you go straight to consumer and straight to retail, skip the distribution step. And I've been utilizing that method to set up accounts all around the county. So if you are in Westchester, Joe, we're readily available throughout the DeChico's chain. In Halftime, we are on the west side of the county in the Oath. We're up northern county in Brewster, DeChico's Brewster. We're also in Pour Wine Bar and Brewing Company in Bedford Hills. I think that gives you a good smattering across the map where you can find us.
Have you got a list of every place you're distributed on your website, Chris?
Absolutely, right on the website too. If he wants to check that out.
Okay, cool, good deal. Yeah, I think you'll be hearing. He says he's in Greenport. I'm assuming you guys know where that is.
Very nice.
Yeah, because all of these things you just listed are Greek to me. I'm like, okay.
I got to plug
Vicky.
some of our retailers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's out in Long Island, Greenport Harbor. Although there are a couple of Greenports, but
He did mention Long Island.
Did he? Okay.
Yep.
So Vicky, have you got that bottle open?
I do. Yes, I've been sipping on it while
really
we've
want
been.
to hear about the ice mead.
Oh my gosh, this is really nice. All right, so it was fizzy when it opened, but it looks to be dissipating quite a bit, so I think it was just travel fizz. But it's this beautiful straw color, and it's so crisp and tart in the nose even, you know, I mean, you smell it and you're like, wow. It smells like an orchard smells when the drops just start to come out of the trees. It's this sort of crisp fall smell. I remember this from my grandfather's orchard when I was a kid. And we had a lot of crab apples around our area. Chris, I saw on your website that you guys like the wilder varieties rather than the more settled, quote-unquote, cider varieties.
We do like wild varieties. I do use cider varieties as well as table varieties in my stuff. What you're drinking there is actually a very unique blend. So
I love this.
That
this is
a
really
combination
nice.
of wine sap. I'm sorry?
Well, wine sap had entered my mind, but yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm really enjoying this. I'm not a dry anything person. These guys will tell you.
No, this is.
I love this.
I'm sorry. I thought somebody was talking there, and I was over them.
No,
that's
it was
wine
my fault.
Sap, Gold Rush apples, which is, you mentioned acid. That is one of the highest acid content apples out there, and it's really nice.
It's so well balanced, though.
And then yes, we used a nice Pink Lady variety in there too, which had really great sugars to it. But Pink Lady has these kind of citrusy notes to it as well, especially depending on the types of varieties you use. We had one with a little bit of russeting, so good tannins on there. The Gold Rush also had a fair amount of russeting. Wine sap, known as a very heritage variety and great for making cider with. Obviously, in its appellation, you can tell it's got a very wine-like quality when it ferments. And we also had access to a Cornell School of Agriculture Extension School apple, which was an experimental apple. My grower is a graduate of the school, so he was able to get his hands on some test apples, and we have the EE 1228 in there as well. And that one is such a well-balanced apple. It's got nice tannins, good acids, good sugar content. The special thing about that cider, Vicky, is that it is naturally cryo-concentrated. So what we let happen with that was we let the apples actually... Yeah.
That's a great term, yeah.
With ice wine, which might be more readily available to most of your listeners might know about ice wine, but ice cider is a very similar practice where you will either in a natural process, you let the apples freeze on the tree, and then the next day their cell walls will have broken. The water content, if it gets warm enough, will evaporate out, and thus you've cryoconcentrated the sugar by volume. Press the juice, and you'll get a higher Brix level or higher gravity level out of it. Which allows you to ferment to a stronger degree, thus the 8.4% that you're drinking right now. Most standard ciders coming out of the Hudson Valley will give you a yield of somewhere, if you ferment them all the way to dryness, something just above 7%. So we were able to take it up a little notch that way.
I love it. I mean, I've had the other ice cider that I've had was one of the Vermont ones. In fact, I think it's Vermont Cider Company. You probably know them. That was not a dry cider; it was a semi-sweet, but it still had the same edge to it, the same crispness that I really love. And I'm a big ice wine fan too. So, I mean, it's got this tartness and the acidity's there, but it's so well balanced that you don't consciously notice it. I mean, if you're looking for it, there it is. But it's so balanced, you're just like, oh wow, I love the way this feels in my mouth. It has great mouth feel. I mean, in dry, one of the biggest things that happens with dry anything is they lose the mouth feel because it's not handled, during the process in a way that leaves it with a lot. This has got great mouth feel.
One thing we always, as a rule in production, and you made me think of so many things there. One, Gold Rush apples. This was the year of Gold Rush apples for me. They are one of my favorite apples as of this point. Working with the grower I'm working with, which is the Orchards of Conklin over in Rockland County in New York, Lower Hudson Valley, west side of the river. But basically, they have a really unique growing climate, and they grow a whole field of Gold Rush. And that apple is so wonderful. It does have excellent acids, just like you're telling, but it is so well balanced that you take a bite of it, and it's like a Granny Smith, but it also has that sugar content that almost overrides the acids and brings them back into play so that it's very palatable. Whereas when you take a bite of a Granny, you have the tannins in the skin, the acids are in the front, and you almost don't even taste the sugars. This apple is kind of like a Granny for people who want to love Grannies, but just it's too tart for them.
Yeah, they are pretty tart. Yeah, yes. I grew up on my grandmother and Granny apples, with pie. That was the thing, and we used to. I remember making pucker faces trying to eat the pieces as she'd cut them up. But yeah, I mean, this is just. I really like it. I really do. I wish I wasn't so far from New York. I'd want to get some of this to stash for when it starts getting warmer around here, which would be like
what? You mean a place tomorrow. I'm closer to for a change?
For a change, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're just across the border. I'm several states away.
It's really funny. We are actually being restricted, but I don't see it as a restriction. I see it as a benefit right now. But we're being restricted to self-distribution to New York State with that product because we chose to use that blue glass. From the federal point of view, it's not a standard of fill because it's a 330 milliliter bottle. So we have to sell it within our state limits. But that keeps it all hyper-local for us, and that, kind of vibes with what we're trying to put out there anyways. It's super small batch. We only did about 300 gallons of it. We're actually doing a special bottle release, as of April 1st when we have our labels, which are all approved now. And we have put out 10 kegs on the market to kind of introduce it. It's been moving really fast, and I did a split on it with another 5, just literally 5 slim kegs that we did with Taconic Distilling. We borrowed one of their bourbon barrels, just emptied it today, and we're getting those 5 kegs on the market now as a special, secondary release, just to get people drummed up to go out and get this ice cider. So April 1st, for your listeners that are in the New York area, especially Westchester, look out for Diner Brewco's Dry Ice.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking I need to, just make a trip up to New York and then go visit my friend in Vermont and collect cider. Yeah. I mean, they're gonna need.
While you're at it, come visit me too.
Yeah, y'all need to make space for the cider coming in this fall, right? So I'd be doing a civic duty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the emptying of the cellars at Oktoberfest, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, my grandmother was German. It's all about making sure there's room for the new stuff. So.
So, how many products do you have?
Access to... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. How many products do you have on available at the moment?
So right now we're focusing on 4 major SKUs. We're doing this ice cider. We're doing the Huguenot cider, which you were saying you were drinking. And
yes.
We also are doing a herbal cider. So I like all of my ciders to be very apple forward. The cider has to speak for itself even when I do a pairing. So our herbalist cider, which is the name of our herbal blend, is a lavender and coriander blend. I use about 1,200 milliliters of coriander tea that I boil the water, steep it off the heat for 5 minutes so that I don't grab too many of the bitter kind of tannins out of the coriander or lavender. But anyways, I use 1,200 milliliters of that, use another 600 milliliters of lavender, so 2-to-1 to the coriander to lavender, creates a nice roundness on top of the sharp notes that lavender brings and floral notes that lavender brings. And we use a champagne base cider underneath that. That's our 3rd SKU. 4th SKU is our totally unique so far. I don't expect it to stay that way because we just did get a lot of attention for it. We got written up in the Times for our miso cider. We use a shiro miso, which is a white miso. It's made with white rice and fermented soy paste. And so we will make a miso soup and blend that in. Miso soup minus all of the kind of chives and other contrivances that go with it. But we make a plain miso, essentially tea, and blend that in with our cider as well. Do a kind of proprietary double cold crashing on it. I don't know of anyone else that's working with miso and hard cider. Nice. It's a really unique product, and it's really wonderful. It brings kind of a savory note underneath the cider. And I was lucky enough to, have a friend have the idea. I was having miso soup in my cider with him, and we said, this is kind of a cool idea. It's sort of the realm of like a salted caramel, like that sort of sweet and savory that goes really well together. And it's been really well received so far. But Hamish, those are our 4 major SKUs.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. And so you said you're only doing the ciders at the moment, despite the name Brewing Co. That's very open to anything basically. You're focusing on the.
Yes.
Yep.
So we actually started with a cider maker's license in New York State. Halfway through the year, I realized a couple of logistical things, and it has always been my goal to kind of have this multiple commodity business as well. But halfway through the year, it was never my goal to move this quickly into the brewing side of it. But I started thinking to myself, in the summer, apples are hard to get. Now, this year is going to be an exception because in the Hudson Valley, we actually did have a very bountiful crop. So I'm going to be able to get my hands on cider apples throughout the year until next fall's harvest. But generally, I thought about it and I said, I'd like to be able to start making beer because in the summer, apples might be tight. The cost per gallon is going to be skyrocketing. Maybe then we'll start focusing on, grain, which has a very fixed cost, and malt, and we can start putting out some test beers. We can start kind of like widening our product line. I also wanted to really expand into this newer sort of product that not many people have heard of, but it's called a graph, and it's just this perfect combination of cider and beer. Essentially, it's a blended apple and malt. A lot of people across the country will supplement their ciders with malt. They call them malt ciders. The idea behind this is that it's more of a true marriage of malt and apple and not just a supplemental sugaring of apple juice where you're in a region of the country that doesn't really grow apples readily. So I really wanted to start pushing into this other product that's kind of a new and innovative sort of marriage between the two, and also put out beers. And this last January, I applied for the brewer's license, which allows me to make both. And and we did get granted our brewer's permit in New York State as well. So now we're testing beers, we're testing grafts, we're thinking about when we want to strategically launch those products as well.
Nice.
Any plans for an apple beer?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Thank you.
So the graph, I guess, would be my answer to that. When we make our first graphs, I'm thinking of them as, for people who like apple beers, that's going to be my answer to my sort of like hoisting up of that product for them. I wouldn't technically, in my mind, perceive it to be a apple beer per se, because again, then you're talking in the realm of whether or not it's like a beer with some added apple, or is it an apple cider with some added malt to kind of give it more sugar. I'm really thinking of this product as a true marriage of the two, and it's hard to do. You know, we've been playing around with different styles of beer, different blends of apples. You have to find something that balances really well in order to pull it off, in order to have it so that it's balanced between the two and not just, hey, this is a beer with a touch of an apple aroma, or hey, this is a cider with this grainy kind of quality to it. I can taste the wheat in here. You know, I'm really trying to find something that works well. So far, we've been really successful with Pilsner malt as a base, and we've been working with a lot of the Gold Rush apples I was mentioning, and it's been working really, really well. So look out for that as well. If people are listening in the Westchester market, we hope to be releasing those pretty soon.
Cool.
Now, you combine varieties of apples, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So how many apples would you normally blend? Or how many is too many in a mix for you?
There's never enough. No, I'm just kidding.
More, all the apples.
Yeah. It really depends. It depends on what sort of flavors you're looking to elicit in your cider. There is a term in the cider making world for juice that's pressed in December, and generally the thought process behind that, the term is the King's blend, or the King's pressing. And the thought process behind that is you've had the whole harvest season going through. You're at the end of the harvest, and early season apples will generally be put into cold storage as they're used along the way, but you'll generally have some apples left over come December. And mid-season apples, same thing. And by the time the late season apples are ripening in early December, you're able to combine all of the season's apples into this really complex fresh pressed apple cider that you can then ferment and gather more kind of like characteristics and more complex quality to the juice that you're fermenting than per se if you were to just have the apples available to you from September or late August. You know, you're able to get those late season golden russets and gold rush and really starchy apples that really need to have some be put into a timeout to let those starches convert into sugars, and you're able to put those in blends and really combine them with those early season apples that don't really need as much time to mature or sweat or kind of like develop their characteristics. And doing that gives you more of a flexibility in terms of the way that you can start blending. You can start really picking between varieties and creating that King's blend. And so, yeah, to answer the question, there's really no limit to how many apples you can put in. I guess it just goes producer by producer, what you want to achieve with the flavors, and how you go about that, I guess, is what access you have to what varieties.
So do you normally have like a base a base cider apple that then you then add the flavors to later in the last 20% or something, or do you really just go all over the place with your percentages?
A little bit of both. So depending on what part of the season it is, my grower will have different apples available. What I do toward the latter part of your question is I go to the farm on about a bi-weekly basis. We'll take cuttings of the apples and we'll squeeze them right onto a refractometer to test the juice levels for sugar, test them for the flavor, and we'll start making blends right there on the fly. Now, the guy I work with is also, to the former part of your question, one of the he would consider himself a small grower, but he's got a 100-acre farm here in the Hudson Valley, so it's big for me. And he's got great access to Honeycrisp. And so Honeycrisp oftentimes makes it into our blend. And it's funny you're saying you're an ice cider fan from Vermont. Mm-hmm. Eden Ice Cider.
That's who it is.
Known for their Honeycrisp ice cider, and that's really great. It has so much residual sugar in it. It's a great ice cider apple because it also has a very wine-like character when you ferment it. But beside that point, when you're making an ice cider and you're cryoconcentrating or you're freezing that juice in order to concentrate the sugar level in it, you really want readily available sugars to bump up that concentration when you do the freezing. And Honeycrisp is a great apple for that. So when I make my dry ice, the difference between that and a traditional ice cider is that I'm freezing the apples. We only get a residual bump, like a minuscule bump in sugar level, which allows me to keep it very dry by fermenting out all the residual sugars available in that process. But in a traditional ice cider, generally you would have a lot of residual sugar left over because you're freezing the juice itself, not the apple, which is a much more efficient process. So you're able to take the original gravity or the Brix level you start with much higher, and thus, even if you ferment out with a champagne yeast, you're still going to end up with some residual sugar in there. So you end up with something that is 11, 12% alcohol, but has maybe like a gravity point or two of residual in there, and it tastes sweet to the mouth and the taste buds. And what's great about that is it drinks like a wine, but it's also very appley in character because you're not adding sugar to it. It's not like you're tossing brown sugar in and cinnamon. You're not adding any beet sugar or invert sugar. You're literally just concentrating the apple and then leaving what's left over of the natural sugars from the apple. So it's this apple punch in the face. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's just it's an apple on on steroids essentially.
Well, it's not all about the sugar. You're concentrating the flavor and all the other parts as well. You're just removing the water, yeah.
Exactly. With Honeycrisp too, you're talking about an apple that has great quality to it. It's not really known as being a very high tannic variety, so it's not very bitter. So I guess that's something that works very well with these ice ciders because when you're having something that you're drinking like a dessert wine, you really don't want high tannin quality in there. It might be kind of cloying after your meal, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. One thing I want to ask that you mentioned before, you mentioned cold storing apples to convert the starches. So you would advocate keeping the apples before pressing, before crushing?
Oh, yeah. Well, it all depends on, again, it depends on the variety. And there's such a palette of apples out there that you can kind of paint with. The colors are really myriad. But, yeah, for certain varieties, like the two that I did mention, which are high starch varieties, like the Gold Rush and the Golden Russet, they can really see a lot of improvement with long aging because those starches will start to convert into sugars. You can then get more of a kind of like sweetness for fermenting. It helps out along the way. Whereas if you're crushing and pressing something that has a lot of starch content, it also can help out in terms of the efficiency of working with your machinery. For instance, if you're using a rack and cloth press and you're using very starchy apples, you can often gum up your cloth. And what that'll do is actually stick the whole process. You have to undo all the cloths, kind of like move all the pumice around. Yeah. And basically you're back to square one if you do it with the wrong sorts of apples.
Okay. Yeah. We use that cheesecloth press quite regularly. So I sort of know what you mean. What I wanted to know is you mentioned tasting earlier, and are you able to taste the starch and know that you need to age a apple, and if so, can you describe it?
Honestly, it would be something that you'd have to know variety by variety, and it would take that kind of like knowing what it tastes like when a Honeycrisp, when when a late season apple is developing those sugars. But yeah, you can taste it. It's just a matter of kind of like, eating it and seeing is the sugar there, or is it still kind of unyielding, as you have it right on the front of your tongue and you can taste that sugar content. So you can taste it, and I think anyone would be able to notice it, whether or not they know the variety or not. But it helps to know the varieties, because then you really know what to expect in your kind of residual taste memory.
Okay. Yeah, most of the apples that we use at home in the amateur world anyway are on the side of the road or something like that. We have no idea what variety they are.
Yeah.
Those are
some of them.
Those are the good ones, man. Those are I like doing that too. I go up state a lot to my grandparents' place and we pick wilds. A lot of times we're using crab apples. I really do love crab apples. They have nice tannins. They are not delicious to eat, but they're really wonderful to press into cider.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I think if it's on the tree and you see a bunch of drops on the ground around it, that's often a good indicator that the tree has kind of converted all the sugars in those apples, because it's starting to let them drop. And you can start picking the fresh ones that are left, and you know that they're going to have nice sugar content to it.
It's funny that you say that, because when I was young, till I was, I don't know, probably about 12 or 13, my great-grandfather had an apple orchard not real far from where I was growing up. And my dad, because, it was his grandparents, he used to go over there all the time. And I remember, my memory shoots me pictures of picking up drops to have them pressed into cider right there on the farm, and how much better that cider was than the stuff that we got from, like, the roadside stands, which were also from local orchards, but were not necessarily made from the drops. And I remember my dad making apple wine in the basement from the crabapple tree down the road.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing I mentioned awesome. There.
Yeah, I grew up in Northwest Michigan. It's all about apples up there at Jerry's.
Oh, yeah. The Mitten.
Yeah.
Do you know of Virtue Cider?
I haven't been there yet. I have to admit I've been kind of focusing on the meaderies in Michigan lately, but
of course.
That's it. Where in Michigan is it?
Honestly, I'm not even sure. I know they're in Michigan.
Virtue Cider?
They're known as one of Virtue. Yeah, it's Greg Hall's project, and he's the guy who was the barrel aging dude for Goose Island. So.
Oh,
Sophie,
okay. They're in Fernville. Fenville. Okay, I think that's.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's not near where I go normally. I'll tell you in a minute, though. They are. Oh, okay. They're down by Holland. Yeah, they're down southwest of Grand Rapids, south of Holland. So
I'm sure they're distributed countrywide. I would definitely pick up a bottle if you're looking for a really great cider, other than Diner, that is. Once we get out there, I hope.
Well, I can't get Diner unless I come to New York, so I'm going to have to settle for Michigan cider when I go home this summer.
So one of the other questions I had was windfall, which is what you call drops. We always call them windfalls. Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that you shouldn't use them due to the bacteria and stuff they can pick up off the ground affecting your cider. Is that mainly, beer people saying that anything that touches it is evil, or is it an actual fact?
Old wives' tale.
Okay.
So yeah, an old wives' tale. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah. That's a nicer way than bashing the poor beer people.
I was thinking of it when Vicky was talking about your grandfather's orchard. Drops are an interesting topic. So, like, a lot of orchards will use them. A lot just say it's not worth the effort to bend over. It's easier to pick it up off the tree.
That was part of it.
I don't think that it's ubiquitous anywhere in the country or the world. I know when I was in Normandy visiting those orchards, cideries, and Calvados producers, they would use drops. They also would shake the trees in order to get the apples to drop and then harvest them right off the ground. But they would do that without letting their animals run on those fields for at least 4 months before time. That way you reduce the risk of E. coli exposure and patulin exposure. Here in the United States, I think it's more often than not that we're harvesting, I don't want to make a hard or fast comment about any sort of rule, but I think cleanliness standards are a little bit more stringent than what I saw in northern France here in the United States. Part of the natural cider making process over there is this period after you crush and press your pumice from the apples that you let it rest after it's crushed and pressed. So not even sweating the apples. We're talking about this apple meal that gets to sit out. It's called couvage, and it's a long resting. Sometimes can be up to 24 hours where you have made this apple meal and you're essentially just letting it sit out in the open and get exposed to whatever bacteria is out there. So it's a natural part of the process. It allows the pectins in the apple to escape, which then will then create a brown hat in the cider, is what they call it, the chapeau brun. And that will then be ionically charged and draw all the nutrients out of the cider, creating this naturally demi-sec or sweet cider at around 3.5 to 5%. It's part of the way they do a natural stuck fermentation, essentially, which is traditional in the French cider making kind of process.
Wow.
But that couvage is a long, long rest where in the United States, I feel like I've never seen anyone really taking the time to really truly go through a couvage, because if the health inspector were to come by, they'd probably get in a lot of trouble.
I've heard of this process,
standard.
giving it a chance to the enzymes to break down that pulp and get a bit more of the sugar, a bit more of the cells open up, and you get a better yield. But yeah, I don't know many people who do it because they want to get it all sorted out. They don't want to wait till tomorrow.
Well, I do, and I've got space to do it. Having done a fair amount of apple pressing on my kitchen table with a homemade apple press and a car jack. And I find I get, if I'm putting this much effort into making apple cider, I'm going to get the best yield I can. So usually what I do is I grind up the apples and set them for 24 hours with pectinase and Campden tablet.
Oh, wow. Do it. Yeah. So actually,
but if it ferments on its own, it makes an awful mess on the carpet. That's what those 2 brown spots are, no matter what my husband may say. I was using
a messy one.
I was using 3-gallon stock pots, so they didn't actually have lids that fit because I was out of fermentation buckets because they were full. Story of my life.
Oh my God.
Yeah, if it can happen in fermenting, it's probably happened to AJ.
I am a bad example. Don't do as I do.
Probably happened in someone's bedroom or someone's apartment closet or
my locker.
You can think of it.
My locker. We were making
exploded,
Applejack in the gallon jug. We bought it at the stand, stuck it in our locker, and left it there until it was bubbling out the top of the 12 of the 1 gallon plastic milk jug, and then took it behind the stage during, this is in high school drama, took it behind the stage and got tiddly when we were supposed to be working.
Nice.
Yeah.
High school Applejack.
Oh God, yeah! You take it, you put it in a locker in a warm school, dude. You got hundreds of kids coursing up down the hallways. There's a lot of body heat going on there.
Doesn't work so well here because they pretty much sorbate everything.
Well, see, this is the stuff you buy from. I grew up in apple and cherry country, so there's literally stands everywhere. So you would just stop by the stand on the way to school and pick one up, and then just take it, shove it in your locker, and nobody questioned because there was always like school sales selling. Girl Scouts, we sold cider to raise money. School, right. Instead of selling the wrapping paper, we sold cider and turkeys. So don't ask.
God.
I have no idea who made up those ideas, but we were totally okay with the cider. It was the turkeys weren't so great, but yeah. Apples were a big part. We used to sneak into the orchards and pick enough apples to take home and beg Grandma to make apple pies, and yeah.
Man, that's awesome. That's kind of how it is. Westchester is interesting because it's very suburban. So I'm doing this in a unique place. There aren't too many. The trend is growing, but there aren't too many suburban or urban cideries out there. But I like it because it gets me out to the farm, which isn't so far away. It's only about a half hour away from here that I go to the Hudson Valley and really get to work with a wonderful farmer. But, you know, it's nice because it gives me a life that combines both worlds. And really what I'm trying to do is bring more of that rural agricultural feel and education to the people here in Westchester County, which we're kind of in an in-between no man's land. It's its own culture, you know, it's got its own population. We're not exactly New York City. We're on the Metro North line, so we're accessible via public transportation into the city, but we also have our own scene up here. And we're also not exactly the Hudson Valley. We're like the lower tendrils of it. The Hudson Valley is known for a very strong agricultural tradition. And so because of that, we're in this sort of in-between that I'm trying to, you know, straddle the balance of with my business and bring a feeling of both of those things to it.
Cool. Well, I liked it when I was staying with Bobby. I mean, I loved that area. It was really pretty. I mean, if you've got to live near a city, that's a very pretty area to do it in. And
it certainly is.
Yeah, it's gorgeous up there. But it reminded me a lot of my sister-in-law and brother-in-law live in Beverly, Massachusetts, which is just before you get to New Hampshire. And it's the same kind of thing, quaint little towns that a lot of people know a lot of other people, but there's also a lot of commuters. They're on the North Train line from Boston. And same kind of thing, though. You're far enough out that you can have kind of the best of both worlds.
It is great. You know, I lived in the city for a little while, and I found myself going just a little bit stir crazy. I'm more of a I need good access to green spaces, but I do like the culture. You know, it's nice to have both.
Now, I was visiting the other day Melavino Meadery in New Jersey, and Sergio's quite down there is quite known for his how shall we say it, stainless steel porn. And we got to see his big, nice fermenters and all that sort of lovely stuff that he all his stainless stuff. And the other day, as I mentioned, I was at Hill Rock Distillery, and they've got like some really sexy wood out there. So tell me about your vessels, your fermenting gear, all the really pretty stuff that you use. Yeah, tell me about that.
So I'm more on the cyborg side of things too, like Sergio is. I have a lot of stainless in my shop. Yep, I've got 2 4-barrel uni tanks, which I use for fermentation and for secondarying purposes. I've got a nice 8-barrel bright, which is really wonderful. I've been processing all my stuff through that for carbonation and serving purposes, going to kegs, bottling. I like to do a lot of primary in high-density polyethylene. I do a lot of wood aging. Like I mentioned, we try and get barrels and collaborate with as many distilleries as we can. I used to work for a New York State farm distillery called Gristmill Distillers up in the Adirondack Park. So I've worked with their cooper. I've worked with them directly using their bourbon and apple brandy barrels. Also with a local guy down here, Good Shepherd Distillery. So the extent of my wood aging really comes in spirit barrels. I do have plans to eventually get a foeder in my shop. I'd really love that. There's something to be said about being a foeder, and it's just essentially just a giant vat that you're made with oak. So it's like think of it like a giant wood barrel. I might be saying the name wrong.
Is it like a wash tub?
It's not. It's like the classic wash tub with like overall suspenders coming off of it that a guy wears down the street.
That's the one. Yeah. So a barrel without the top and bottom. Yeah, I gotcha.
No, I'm kidding. It's essentially just a wooden vat for fermenting, and it's usually closed top. It'll have like a side hatch man port for access for cleaning and dump valve, inlet valve, pressure relief valve. All the sort of stuff you get on your commercial tanks. It's just made of wood, and it looks just like a big old oak barrel standing on legs.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's in the works. I like to play around in terms of. It sounds like you're more affiliate to the wood aging side.
Personally, I'm all over the shop with how I like to do things. I don't use oak very much at all. I have used it in the past to some years later, great success. So now I've got to start using it again now that I know it works, because I went away from it because young oak for me wasn't doing very well. But yeah, I would very much. I'm very much a timber person. I like my bench tops. I like my handwork, all that sort of stuff. So I love the idea of incorporating the timber into my mead making now as well. And there's even a few people back home experimenting with native timbers for aging that aren't oak. So yeah, some very interesting stuff in that field going on. But yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Bobby does a lot of. If you're with him, I think he does a lot of oak aging as well. He does a lot of spirit barrel. Meats,
yeah, he does.
And to successful kind of ends too. He's given me some meats that I really loved with the spirit barrel ages on them. So.
Especially his apples. His apples do very well on age.
His what?
His apple meads do very well aging. On
I haven't had his apple pie mead this year, but he was bragging about it, so tell him to get me a bottle.
The one with the pecan? I've got a bottle of it right in front of me.
Oh God, that's so good.
You're a lucky man.
Yeah. So further to that, how do we process our apples before we start putting them in our vats and our bottles? What's your process in scrudding them or in shredding them before you press them, etc., etc.? What are we looking for?
Sure, and that kind of comes back to that drop question. One thing you're going to do if you do use drops is always use a brusher washer unit. So something that's rinsing the apples off and then brushing them down. Usually a tumbler, which will lead into your crusher. And that helps to just make sure you're looking at the apples and taking out anything that might look like it's started to have some rot or anything along those lines. And your crusher and presser, pretty standard. The one I'm using is with the farm. It's that rack and cloth press I was talking about, hydraulic rack and cloth. And then post making your juice in New York State and advisably everywhere else, you would want some sort of pasteurization going on. So one thing that we use is UV pasteurization or UV treatment. It's very effective, arguably more effective than heat pasteurization or flash pasteurization. And it's really nice because process-wise for me, if I were to flash pasteurize my juice, you can oftentimes evoke the pectin that's in the cider to become very, very hazy. And one way to ameliorate that or mitigate it is using pectinase, as you mentioned, Vicky, earlier, or pectic enzyme, which will break that down, do it pre-fermentation so that the alcohol doesn't denature the enzyme. But with a UV treatment, it's not even necessary. You can also throw in your pectinase when you UV treat, just as a proprietary or like a safety precaution. But honestly, I never use pectinase at this point because we're UV treating our juice, and it works really well just as a safety precaution or pasteurization method without actually bringing out that pectin and creating a lot of haze in my cider. So it's one of the advances of science, and it's a wonderful advancement that allows me to make some really nice cider and avoid using that enzymatic treatment, which is neither here nor there. If you need to use it, you need to use it. And it's I'm not knocking flash pasteurization either. It leaves the cider more in its kind of innate state.
Yeah. Does flash pasteurization give you any jammy type characters?
I wouldn't want to comment to it too much just because I'm no expert in the flash pasteurization process. I've used ciders, I've fermented ciders from orchards that use it. I've never really noticed any sort of, variable difference between the two. If I were to have both technologies available to me and be doing it on a day-to-day basis, comparing different blends of apples, seeing what, because if you're flash pasteurizing low pectin apples, you're probably not going to notice the difference. But if you're flash pasteurizing a high pectin apple, say you have a lot of grannies in that mix, you're probably going to notice that pectin really come out and start to create a very hazy cider. So it really all depends. But I've never really delved into it too deeply. I just know that UV treatment is kind of my preferred method. So to answer your first question, that's what we prefer to do. We like to work with orchards that are UV treating their juice. Just makes my job a little bit easier as a cider maker on the processing end afterwards.
All right, and obviously, unlike beer, it has no adverse effects on the juice, the UV there.
Right. The UV treatment leaves it basically leaves the cider in its kind of like native state. It's just killing any sort of bacterias in there. So the idea behind that is that cider has a predominance of acetobacter. It really is very ciderphilic, and it'll be on the apples. It's probably on your pressing equipment. And when you're making a fresh cider, if you just let it start fermenting naturally, its predilection is to go toward vinegar. Unless you're taking methods.
Unless you're trying to do it intentionally, yes.
Yeah. So unless you're using sulfites or UV treating, or you're going to flash pasteurize, you're probably going to end up with vinegar or something very sour by the end of the day. So that's why we do it. We make sure we're precluding from that acetobacter, precluding from E. coli, patulin, lactobacillus, all the sort of souring bacteria, Brettanomyces. You know, we don't want any of that. I like to make very clean, nice ciders, wine-like, palatable, vinous. Not taking those methods would probably leave me with what a lot of people are branding as sour ciders nowadays, which are becoming very popular. I think technically the definition of those sort of ciders fall more into the realm and are more akin to Spanish-style sidra, which self-admittedly, needs a little bit of vinegarization to fit the style and the category. But in America, you know how we like to play around with names. So nowadays, those are being called sour ciders.
Well, I can tell you firsthand, as a amateur cider maker, you really don't want to have 200 gallons of apple cider vinegar, no matter how good it tastes.
You need a lot of salad for that.
Yeah, it was almost drinkable, believe it or not. It was really, really yummy vinegar, but still, no. Took a long time to get rid of it.
Well,
you need a lot of friends to give it away to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did. Was I bottled mine up and gave it away for Christmas as vinegar, but I did mine intentionally. What I did was I took after I was done with pressing it, I took it, rehydrated it, and added a little bit more sugar to it. So it was not strictly pure apple cider vinegar, but it certainly tasted like it.
That sounds really good. I like making vinegar too. It's all just part of the value add products you can make from one thing. When you can turn one thing into a hard cider and you can turn it into a vinegar, it's more valuable and more flexible as a base product. And I think that's really cool. One thing you can do to encourage vinegarization as well, other than not treating it or UV pasteurizing or flash pasteurizing, is to oxygenate that cider. So if you have cider that's going toward vinegar and you want to encourage it along, just put a little muslin cloth on top of replace the airlock, put a muslin cloth up there, shake the hell out of your carboy, and, do a little rain dance and hope it turns to vinegar. But generally, over-oxidization will encourage that acetobacter too.
Yep. That's what I did with mine, but I keep all my vinegar tools in any bucket that's had vinegar in it, separate from anything that's going to ever make wine.
That's a good disclaimer to put out there, and I should have thought to do that. Whenever I'm telling people to make cider, I like to do that myself. You can always bleach your stuff afterward, but or boil it. But it's a good precaution to keep in mind that you should probably not be mixing your vinegar materials and your cider materials. Acetobacter is pretty insidious. It'll get into what you're making.
I always kind of thought of it as it's like keeping kosher. You have a totally different set of utensils, or they're contaminated. It's just they don't ever meet. I got a buddy he keeps kosher, and he shared a house with with a Christian. or rather a non-Jew. I don't know if he was a Christian or not, but anyway, he didn't keep kosher. And so they had two kitchens. Yeah, they had two kitchens, one upstairs and one downstairs. And never the twain tools or anything that was in either kitchen ever met the stuff that was in the other kitchen, ever. You know, and so I've always just kind of subscribed to that. It's just safer that way.
Yeah. And it's very hard to boil a 10-gallon barrel. I'd hate to think how hard it would be to boil anything bigger.
You need a 20-gallon barrel to boil it in. You know? I'm
not sure how I'd boil a 5-gallon fermenting bucket.
Yeah, the buckets in the glass are easier than the wood. That's for sure. Once it's in wood, there's no going back.
Yeah. You're never getting it out then.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Then it's your vinegar starter forevermore.
Yeah, exactly. That's your.
One of the really hot,
go ahead.
Hot controversial topics at the moment in the mead making world is fermentation temperature. There's been a lot going on about.
Sure.
For a long time, we've believed that a cold temperature is best for making meads. I mean, it's definitely what I prescribe to. I keep it down around 16 degrees Celsius, which someone else can calculate that while I'm talking, for Fahrenheit. And
let me look that up on Google.
And I just have a thermometer with Google, both in front of me.
And yet at the moment, people are talking a lot about doing fruit meads as high as 85 Fahrenheit or 30 Celsius. So what's your take, and what temperature do you like to keep, and do you regulate your temperature at all?
Yes, heavily. I have a glycol chiller in my space, and I like to regulate my ambient temperatures with forced air. So I have an HVAC system as well, and electric baseboard heating in the winter. But generally, I am right with you, because 16 degrees Celsius looks to me like it's right around 60 degrees. And that's where I like to have my fermentations on the high side. What I like to even have them a little bit colder, especially in wild fermentations, like with that Huguenot cider that you were trying, Hamish.
It's almost finished.
Because it's a microculture that's got all of this multiculture of bacteria in it. You know, the natural native yeasts and bacteria could actually contain acetobacter. They could contain lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, Pediococcus, all those things we mentioned before. And those are all souring bacteria. So I have kind of proprietary methods that I use to make sure that if I am going to do a wild fermentation, that things stay clean. One of them is temperature. So all those bacteria really love things above 75 degrees. And I've seen them really taper off in their activity under 65. So I figure 5 degrees better than that is even better. Another way we are mitigating from that is that the conversion of acid from alcohol takes time, and it can only happen after the alcohol has been converted from sugar. So my ciders are also sulfited for shelf stability. I do that with my champagne yeast cultures, and I do it with my wild cultures for stability's sake. But with the wild cultures, I also have a timing that I'll wait for 3 weeks for that fermentation to happen, and then 3 weeks on the dot, I am sulfiting and sorbating those ciders to stabilize the bacterial content, basically kill whatever's there and keep it the way that I want it to taste when I put it in the bottle. So temperature and timing and sulfiting are very important steps within my process. One thing I like to do as well is I like to ride my fermentations kind of on their own heat. And what I mean by that is when you ferment something that's large enough, like for instance, your 200-gallon vinegar fermentation, you know, that's enough that, and even a 50-gallon drum will generate a lot of heat. So basically with 200, 300 gallons, you could be looking at something like 8 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit that you're generating just off the fermentation that the yeast is producing. So I like to set my ambient temperatures or my glycol chiller to 60, wait until the fermentation kicks off, and then I'll actually lower my temperatures into the 50-degree range, and I'll let the ambient temperature of the fermentation itself ride it back up to the 60 degrees that I want it to be at. That's something that a lot of people forget when they're fermenting, is that if a fermentation is generating its own heat and you're at 60 degrees, well, you're actually probably closer to 70, 72. And then you could
Yes.
be talking about encouraging different sorts of bacteria that you wouldn't have considered at the temperature ranges that you thought you were at. So I think it's important to remember that when you're fermenting, because it can really affect how your flavors come out in the end, and that's the most important thing.
That's a really nice way of explaining it. I always try and tell people, and I have trouble explaining it when I'm temperature controlling. I always control the temperature of the must to 60 degrees Fahrenheit by putting the thermostat of the fridge inside my fermenter. So that's
a good move.
yeah, but that's a nice way of explaining it for how if you are controlling the airspace, it makes a big difference.
One thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. One thing I wanted to ask was you've mentioned native yeasts that are on the trees and whatnot. And you mentioned champagne yeast. When you do a champagne yeast, are you willing to divulge which champagne yeast you like to use?
Oh, of course. It's like any brewer who's willing to give up their recipe. No one's going to make it the same way, So I'm totally cool with that. I love using Lalvin EC1118. It's a wonderful yeast. It's always been one of my go-tos. It's highly flocculent. It ferments, even at cold temperatures, it ferments very well and attenuates extraordinarily well. I think it brings a nice flavor profile to my ciders. I don't know if it's worked well for me just because of the particular sorts of apples I have access to here in Westchester and the Hudson Valley, but I've always loved that yeast. I do also love, I'm kind of a Lalvin brand guy. I love D47. I'm a big fan of the Red Star Premier Cuvée. I think that's a wonderful yeast as well. I also like the Premier Blanc. Seyfal has a nice cider yeast that's called the Saf Cider. Fairly clean fermenting. Done some experimenting with the Mangrove Jack cider blend. It's more estery than I really like. It's got kind of more of a fruity content to it than when you're working with fruit to begin with, you don't really need to encourage more esters. Those are some of my standbys. And then wild yeast cultures that I've harvested throughout New York State, which is a crapshoot. Sometimes you get vinegar. Most of the time you get vinegar, and a couple of times you get lucky, and those are the ones you save and you create yeast starters with. I've been really lucky with my fermentations that I got unpasteurized juice in very, very rural areas. Like two of my cultures that I come back to a lot are from the Adirondack Park, which is just very remote. And then another really remote place, that St. Lawrence River yeast culture that I was talking about, where my grandparents are from. That one I'm attached to just because of the nostalgia of the place being like where I grew up and went every summer. But it's cool to think that the more rural you go and the further away from these cities you go, the more kind of pure the Saccharomyces culture is. That's a correlation I've noticed. I don't know if it's a complete and utter causality, but it's definitely a correlation I've seen in my trials and experiments.
Cool. Yeah, that's really nice. Have you ever considered having those wild yeasts analyzed and banked in one of the stores by either Lalvin or Scott Labs or someone like that?
I have. It's something that, amongst the million other things I'm doing, I'm trying to work on. I actually have a friend who made a connection for me to someone who does just that. They're out of a North Carolina lab, and I'm currently communicating with them about it. With the amount of stuff that it takes being kind of like a startup and a one-man shop. Actually, I've just recently hired some employees, which is really nice to finally be growing to the point that I can justify it. But for the beginning part of my business, there are so many things to take care of that certain things have fallen by the wayside. But that's one that's been on my radar, and I mean to get to it. It's just it hasn't happened yet.
Hey, Nish, if you're done, I'd like to jump in with a few questions.
Go for it.
Hey, you go right ahead. You're going to have to squeeze in to get a word in edgewise at the moment, but.
Good. Well, and you've been doing a great job of hitting a lot of the questions I was going to start with as well, and so I just let you run with it because you were doing fabulous. Good job tonight. I have a couple questions in regards to once you inoculate your must.
Mm-hmm.
I am only slightly educated in the cider side of things because oftentimes people that are trying to do sizers talk a lot about cider, and it seems to me from the little bit that I understand the difference between the two. And mind you, I don't have anything at all against ciders, but my heart's really in the mead world, and so that's where I've concentrated all my efforts and energy to learn. But it has seemed to me that there's quite a lot of difference in the approach to your fermentation kinetics. In other words, we like to do typically oxygen additions in the first, say, third of the fermentation process. We do staggered nutrient additions to feed our yeast to make them strong and healthy and move forward in a certain time frame. And not that we try to rush anything by any means. That's never the intent, but we are looking for a clean ferment. Now, when I talk to other people that seem to know more about cider than I do, it seems as though, so I'm wanting you to clarify and to speak to this, if you would please, that oftentimes cider people talk like they really want, it almost seems like they would prefer 2 points for their yeast to chew up 2 points a day rather than 10 or 15 or even 20 if they were able to do that in a clean fashion like many times we can with mead. So I had one question, is what's the purpose or design to, in my opinion, or my limited experience, I guess I would rather say, that almost seems like you're forcing the yeast to struggle along. And then when we make sizers, typically, unless you pick a yeast strain that's quite good at not making it H2S, we seem to get a lot of sulfur notes naturally in the process. And, of course, then we try to vigorously stir and maybe last scenario splash rack to try to just blow off some of that H2S with agitation rather than going to different, copper additives or whatnot. I would wonder if you could just speak to the difference between our approach as making ciders or sizers rather, and of course what you do as a cider professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you were kind of analyzing that. So I've been lucky enough to get to experience, sorry about that, I have someone coming in the room. I've been lucky enough to get to experience the tutelage of not only Bobby Slanzy, but also a really great mead maker, who I worked for at the Westchester Homebrew Emporium, Phil Clark. And both of them have kind of given me insights into the stuff you're talking about with mead making. And what I think the major difference is really the answer to your question is original gravity. And I think here's my explanation is when you're making a mead, your gravities are so high that you need that staggered nutrient addition, and you really do need that oxygenation to help your yeast along the way. But with a cider, you could be talking naturally without any chaptalization or additional sugar that you're adding in. You could be talking about a gravity at the max at 1050. So when you're working with a product that has more of a natural lean toward souring, more of a natural lean toward acetobacter, using methods like CO2 purging and precluding from oxygenation, which helps insidious bacteria, helps you keep your cider clean, but additionally, you're not worried about that champagne yeast not being able to finish the job at a gravity of 1050. Even without the oxygen, even without the additional stirring, even without the additional staggered nutrient addition, you're really not worried about a strong yeast strain not doing its job. Whereas with mead, you could add a champagne yeast in there, and without the staggered nutrient addition and without the additional stirring and sort of help along the way, it will not get its job done. also, I think that mead probably has a little bit more of an advantage in terms of being less bacterially prone, just because honey has such a osmosis character. It's so concentrated, it takes that water content away from the bacteria that might hurt it. I hope that's an answer that helps. I won't proclaim to be an expert on mead, though, so it's hard for me to tell you a delineated difference between the two.
So you actually then, sounds like you don't do anything intentionally to try to keep your kinetics regulated at a certain level. It's just kind of the nature of the lower gravity, which quite frankly, most of what at least I make, I jokingly say my session meads or short meads are start at 11:20 and go up from there.
Yeah, that would be a big old cider for me. My ice cider that Vicky was drinking, that was probably, let me think, that was at 1160, and when I've done traditional ice ciders where I concentrated the juice itself, so I got a little bit more of an efficient concentration, those are at like 1180. Or excuse me, not 11, 1050 and 1080. My apologies. I heard you say 11 instead of 2. So I'm way shy of that. I'm at, an original gravity that doesn't even touch probably most mead makers and what they're working with.
Right. In fact, all of the ale yeast that I'm familiar with would easily chew through that many points, let alone the, more maybe high-powered wine strains that we typically use making mead.
I'd be interested.
Yeah.
I used to make my sizers with Red Star. The Cote de Blanc and Pasteur were two of my favorite yeasts back before I had access to all of the Lalvin and Scott Labs and all that stuff. So, those were what was available to me in my local brew shop, and I loved them. I thought they made amazing sizers because I'd go get pressed apples down at the State Farmers Market here in North Carolina. We do a lot of apples in the western part of the state, and they all come down there. So I'd get my cider from them, and I always thought it made a really nice cider, lots of rich tones. And that would be the ice cider that you gave me that is gone now. Just saying. It's a was ice cider, not an is ice cider.
It's got a real evaporation problem.
Yeah, it really does. I was astonished at how fast it evaporated out of that glass, man. But it was very, very good. Thank you so much for the gift of a bottle. It was very, very nice.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. And hopefully I get to try all of your meads sometime. Make sure you send some Bobby's way with my name on them.
Oh, I will. Yeah, when I get some done, which I never seem to these days. It's every time I start one, something comes up, and I'm either out of town when it's time to rack it, and it goes sideways or something, So, yeah. I'm working on getting some done.
Yep. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Do you have any certain rehydration protocols that you use to get your stuff started? And I'm assuming because there's so much natural yan in apple juice that you never have any intentions or need to feed them any additional yan along the way, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, I do like to use nutrients at the front end of a champagne ferment. I will, before I close everything up, I'll throw nutrients in there, usually a little DAP, some Firm K, if I need it. In my starter, I'll use some Energizer. But generally, when I make a starter, so I like to keep my yeast in the medium they were happy fermenting in. So generally, I'll have that banked in cider itself, and then I'll have that frozen, scrape that, grab it, and it really depends on the size of the fermentation, but I will rehydrate. White Labs suggested to me something like 2 to 4 liters on the size fermentations that I do. So I'll try and get about 2 to 4 liters depending on whether or not I'm going 4 or 8 barrels. And I'll feed it some Energizer. I actually do feed it. I use a brewer's trick, and I'll feed it some dry malt extract as well. It really helps to wake that yeast up because it likes eating that sugar. And also extract has protein in it. It has nutrient content in there for the yeast as well. So because it's because cider, and I'm assuming honey is as well, I never really even thought to think of it, but cider at least is totally devoid of most amino acid content. So without adding those extra nutrients in there, you can actually end up with a naturally stuck fermentation, which, as we were talking about, the French like to do it, the English like to do it as well. It really just depends on what I'm going for. But when I do a really robust fermentation, I will use nutrients.
Right. Now, when you use your pressing machine or whatever it is that you get your juice from, is that rather clarified juice then, because you're not having a lot of detritus go through your cloth filter, so to speak?
No, it's not clarified. Actually, fresh pressed juice is just what you're thinking of when you go to a farm stand and you get that dark amber liquid. That's what I use. That's what I ferment. Yeah. And I have to go through a process. Actually, recently I've kind of changed my methods. I was a big fan of using wine clarifiers. I like to use ketosan and kelsisol in combination and really grab those positively and negatively charged ions and move them down and rack off, or if I'm in a conical, I'll just dump the leaves. But as of recently, I've been using heavy cold crashing in my jacketed vessels, and it's been achieving the same sort of clarity that I look for without using the shellfish derivatives, which is nice because I actually get a lot of people asking me, is your cider vegan? And in the past, I've had to say no. But moving forward, I can actually confidently say, yes, my cider is vegan. I'm not going to go ahead and go through all the trouble of getting it like certified by whatever government agency I need to put a stamp on my label. But if people want to ask me if it's vegan, I can now say yes. And it's really nice to be able to cater to that palate as well. But there's so many ways to skin that cat. You know, like there's also pad filtering. I'm sure you guys use a lot of it. I know Phil and Bobby do with their meats, and it's something that I shy away from, but it can take that kind of clarified cider or mead and move it to a diamond polish. I like my stuff to have a little bit more of a natural feel and taste to it. Don't want to strip any of the kind of real apple character away from the product. There's got to be something there that adds to the mouthfeel and the body of the product itself. And so that's why I don't particularly use a pad filter myself, or a pad filtering system, but I don't knock it. I love ciders that are made, or apple wines that are made with pad filtering. I just don't personally do it myself.
I understand. Incidentally, and I certainly don't know like the logistics of when you get down to the nuts and bolts legality of the whole thing, but going back to the super clear, if you speak to their representatives, they say that by the time the process that they use brings their product to the marketplace, and now I know this holds true for people that are allergic to shellfish, there's none of that particular fraction of the shellfish left in their product, so it will not elicitate, some kind of a allergic reaction. So I don't know for sure what that means in regards to your vegan stamp, but it may be something that you might consider looking into with the representatives.
Interesting. Yeah, always good to know. Knowledge is power, but as of right now, if I can keep up what I'm doing, then I probably don't even have to go down that rabbit hole, because I'm liking where we're at, and it's not even using it.
Sure, that was just an FYI kind of tidbit on the side.
We've got a listener. We've got a listener question from Michael Wilson. He says, "With your research in France, did you learn anything you want to share about historical Chouchon on their version of a cider?" Or, he said cider, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, a historical. I don't know if they're. Okay, so historically, Chouchon, I believe, is a Brittany product. Although I guess you can make mead wherever in France. And that's, I believe, just the French term for mead. I didn't delve into it too deeply. To be very frank, I don't want to, comment on anything I really didn't research. But I did have one Chouchon while I was there. It was a wonderful, wonderful honey wine. and it was at a really great spot. I can really only plug the place, and the honey wine itself was delicious. It was a Brittany make, but it was at this cafe in Paris called Brez Cafe, which is this Japanese, French, Brittany, Japanese kind of like hybrid restaurant where they make crepes, and they make a version of a crepe called an apéro, or an appetizer crepe, and they roll them like sushi. So they'll make savory buckwheat crepes, and the buckwheat is what ties Brittany and Japan together. The guy who owns the place his name is Bertrand Lachet, and he has studied Japanese cuisine over in Japan, was a traditional French chef as well, and kind of wanted to bring his home in Brittany and combine that and make a hybrid style of, food, cuisine, and culture. But he is a big proponent of Brittany ciders, which are wonderful, Normandy ciders, and his cafe, Brez Cafe, has multiple locations across the world. Really, really cool. Definitely check it out. That's where I had the chouchon, and it was excellent. But I didn't delve too deeply into French meads.
So, Michael, that work for you? He said, he says chouchon is usually made with both apple cider and honey, and then fermented with spices. So, yeah, it's a cider, so really more of a mead. But there's some really good ones over there. When they went over there on a trip for the AHA, 15, 18 years ago.
Michael, I was too busy getting drunk on Calvados. I'm sorry.
Oh, God. So, yeah, Hamish is directing us. So, AJ.
Well, I was wondering a little bit about your apple processing. Exactly how do you handle your apples? But you mentioned that you wash them because you use windfalls. And I presume you use a scrudder, and you've got the press. Is there anything else in the processing that you care to mention?
The pasteurization unit as well. I personally, most of my production actually isn't windfalls. Most of my production is picked right off the tree at the orchard. I was saying if windfalls are used, then you would want to use a brusher and washer unit. The farm I work with actually predominantly just picks fresh apples right off the tree, and those are the ones that make it into the bins. But I'm not against using windfalls, and I have done some picking upstate where I was picking wilds, and I've grabbed stuff off the ground where I knew it was clean. I guess one thing to answer your question that I didn't bring up before is you'd want to know if the fields were run with animals within the 4 months before you use the apple. That's generally the timeline they give for making sure it's sterile and not exposed to E. coli from animal bacteria from their feces, essentially. And additionally, you want to know if the field has pesticides on it, fungicides, pesticides, any sort of stuff like that. So I guess the front end of it was what I didn't mention. You're thinking about what's on the grass before the apple hits the ground. And that's also very, very important to consider. So, you think about those two things, the brusher washer unit. You would want to make sure that you're pasteurizing post making the juice. Those are all the best practices in the industry for coming up with some clean cider, or at least healthy to drink cider.
Very cool. I had one question about that before. I mean, with regards to brushing and washing the apples, I agree. We don't have a machine so much as a bucket, some scrubbing brushes, and a couple of children. But
elbow grease.
Yeah, what are kids for? I wanted to know. Yeah, when you crush your apples, what the level of scratting or crushing, or how fine is the pomace? Do you cut the apples into a fine pomace? Do you smash the apples into a fine pomace? Do you pulverize? Do you mill them? What's your process?
Somewhere between a pulverization and a smashing, just to put it in terms you used. It's if you're making applesauce, you're making applesauce, but it's going to be hard to press applesauce. It will just come right out of the cheese, which is what we call the cloth. You know, the texture of the crush has to be right. It's kind of a grated, but a little finer than a grate. And it's, when you see it, when it comes off the rack, it's kind of funny because it comes off the rack and it's been compressed by thousands of pounds of pressure. And so it looks like these mats of this sort of somewhere between smashed and pulverized apple. And it's got the skin in there, and you've got every kind of like all the goodness of the apple is turned into this almost tree bark or fruit bark, if you can imagine it. This crumbly fruit bark.
And it's brown at that point normally.
Yes, it looks orangey brown, and it's speckled with all the colors of the different skins that the apples that were in that blend that was crushed and pressed. And you can eat it. They don't, you know, it's very acidic, so it's not actually great as a fertilizer, but they'll use it for, mostly it's good for feed. It's good for animals. You can feed it to pigs. You can feed it. Pigs really love it.
So does my bunny.
It can go a bunch of different ways. But one thing that it's not great for is laying it out on a field, because it's got such high acid content from the malic acid in the apples that it will actually kind of start destroying your field. So it's something to get rid of or feed to animals, and otherwise you're finding a way to compost it or bring it to a local like landfill. It's tricky stuff to get rid of afterward if you don't have access to the right sort of area where you can either dump it or feed it to something.
Yeah, I dry mine out, and I use a grater on a food processor for my operation, and because the juice is pressed out, it ends up being a little bit lower in sugar content, so it's safe to feed to the rabbit.
There you go. Rabbit feed. I'm sure they don't appreciate that as much as the carrots.
Deer feed. It makes great deer feed.
Oh, I'm sure it would.
Deer love it.
Oh, yeah. Ken Schultz, who has a meadery up in Montana, takes all of his fruit leftovers after he makes his meads and somehow squishes it down, gets literally like freeze dries it, you know, gets all of the liquid out of it. So it's like this crumbly sort of dusty stuff. And we took a few buckets of it up to his castle that he's building in the mountains, a literal castle, and dumped it out for the deer. He said he's got the most well-fed deer on the mountain.
Yeah, and you know what? If it starts to ferment a little bit, they're the happiest deer too.
Yeah.
Very happy.
Yeah, very happy. Yeah. He said it's hilarious because the squirrels will of course get it before the deer ever get to it, and they get a good chunk of it. And he said he will many a day sit in his dooryard with a glass of mead and just watch the squirrels stumble around under the trees. He says it's hilarious to watch.
We at the distillery I worked for that distillery I mentioned in the Adirondack Park, and after we would distill the wash, oftentimes we would just dump it outside of the distillery, and there was a family of deer there that were the drunkest, happiest deer I've ever seen in my entire life. They would come back consistently because they knew it was dinner time, you know, but they were having a good time about it.
So have we asked you about nutrients yet, and how you apply nutrients to your ferment?
I don't think we have.
Yeah. I think I mentioned I like to use nutrients depending on the type of fermentation. Like if I'm doing a kieved or natural ferment in that sort of naturally stuck fermentation method that the French or the English use, I won't use nutrients because that defeats the whole purpose. But other than that, love to use nutrients for robust fermentations. I generally will use them all up front because, as we were talking about, cider's kind of a different game than mead. It doesn't need as much help along the way. So I'm just a kind of like all up front sort of guy. I use the recommended dosage per gallon for the amount of gallonage that I'm using or fermenting, and I'll just add it right on the front end of my entire fermentation. generally before fermentation has even started. That way it's there and ready once the yeast is really active.
And what sort of nutrient do you use?
Diammonium phosphate. And I also use Firm K, which is, I think it's LD Carlson. I'm forgetting the brand make on that.
I think it is, yeah. Have you tried Firmo at all? Has that come into the cider world yet?
No, and we have another one that they came up with just for cider specific, but I haven't been so savvy as to pick it up yet. But I do use nutrients. I'm not I'm no nutrient Luddite. I'll put it that way.
Try the new stuff. You never know how good it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's really fascinating to get a look into, your world, as it were. We tend to live pretty strongly in the mead world, and I love cider, and I love craft ciders, and drink them wherever I go. So getting kind of a look behind the curtain is pretty cool.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show. It's nice to talk to you guys. Mead and cider are not so different. They're both very wine-like in their approach, and it's cool to think that I'm able to experience the culture that you guys are creating too. I got to come out there and do the Mazer Cup with you guys one day.
Yeah, you do. You need to. There was 1,100 meads from at least a dozen different countries this year.
It's well worth the experience. It really is.
Yeah.
I saw on Facebook that it was a big old event, and actually I saw a post from Sergio, who you mentioned earlier, that they had done fairly well at the competition, and they make some really awesome meads. We were lucky enough in the home brewing club that I'm a part of, that Bobby leads. He managed to get Sergio to come out and taste some of his meads with us. Absolutely phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, his stuff is really good. I was up there when I went up for the Firm Fest. I stopped at Sergio's on the way up because I was trying to miss New York traffic since I had to go up to Peekskill. But it was just really neat because I got to try a bunch of his stuff that I hadn't had the opportunity to yet. I had kind of gone with the ones that I was pretty sure I'd like, and since shipping yada yada and all that, I just kind of stuck with those. So I got to try pretty much the entire spread plus a couple that weren't on the list, and yeah, I came home with way too damn much meat is what I did.
Yeah, he's got like 18 meads on his spread, which is just remarkable between his light mead, his session meads and his full strength and his dries are just fantastic. And to have 18 of them there, and anything you want to take home, he's got the canning facility right there. They can them on the spot.
Oh yeah,
and they hand them to.
He's got a growler machine. Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant. I was just geeking out like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, those are great, aren't they?
I think they're such good things to have. I need to get one. I've been doing growler fills. I have like a counter pressure bottle filler in my spot, so I do growler fills for people. But it would be so wonderful to tap into that technology, and it's so readily accessible. I just need to get the funds for it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Per usual, money.
I know that.
Yeah.
We're seeing a fair number
looking at the machine.
Oh, go ahead.
Looking at the machine, it seemed rather simple, which would keep the cost is probably still over $1,000, but still, it seemed like a rather cheap machine, which was really what impressed me as to how its simplicity and its functionality. It was a really, really nice unit.
Yeah, it's essentially just an automated crimper, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. And it comes in different sizes. The Sellerman's guys in Michigan have I want to say it's a 24 or 32 ouncer, which is I think the same size as the one that Mike Fall at Rabbit's Foot in California had, because I've still got some of his braggots in cans. And yeah, I know, right? And then the one that Sergio had was a 16, I think. And did you try the Palmers, Hamish?
Yeah, I did.
Those were so good.
I think the peach and the 3/4 were my favorite.
Me too,
in
yeah.
that regard.
Peachy and 3/4, yeah. I still got my peachy Palmer. I haven't drunk it yet, but that'll be soon. But yeah, I'm definitely going to stop up and see you, Chris, next time I get up to New York, which I like to try to do at least once a year. I like New York. I just don't want to live there. It's a neat place to visit, but I'm a country girl. So.
There you go. Well, yeah, please do. That would be really great. And any of you guys are always welcome. And all the listeners out there, please check out Diner Brew Co. online. We're about 5 months old, growing fast, and we're looking to, win your hearts over to cider. Not just America's old drink, America's new drink, too.
Well, there you go, Hamish. Now you know where you're supposed to go tomorrow.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You got one day before you go back to Australia. You better get cracking. But yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man. The whole thing has been fascinating. I've been listening and just kind of following through the whole thing, and I'm sure AJ's been scratching down notes.
2 pages.
2 pages. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I only gave you every secret to the trade you could ever look for, so don't worry about that. No, there's still a ton to learn. I learn every day, and that's the wonderful thing about being in our industry is you get to keep experimenting and keep learning, and that's what life is about, making art and making people happy. But it was a pleasure coming on, and thank you for having me, guys. It's really nice to get to talk to the Got Meat crew, and it gets to promote my brand, so thank you.
There you go.
Thanks so much for coming.
You're most welcome.
We'll have to send Hamish up to do a report. So
Hamish has homework.
Yeah, if you can drag Bobby down to the border of the Bronx, tell him he's expected.
Yeah, I got Bobby to take a day off yesterday and show me upstate New York, which was really nice. I don't think he can get another day off in the short term. So, and I'm going on Thursday, so I'll just have to leave him instructions to come see you.
Maybe next time. Maybe if I get him a couple of bottles, he'll ship them out to you.
There you go.
Thanks for spending time with us tonight. Tonight's been one of my favorite podcasts in a long time.
Yeah, I like the difference. It's fun to see into other parts of the industry. Is a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. And if you need to, if any meads are falling off the back of the wagon, or
wait. Okay, so you haven't been to Bobby's basement yet?
Not his new one.
Bobby's bargain mead basement, man. So you gotta check it out. Best liquor store in Westchester County.
That's like the wine and liquor premium, not discount warehouse.
Yeah, that would be it. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think if you come armed with cider, you could probably enact some pretty good trades. So, yeah.
Tasting your cider tonight, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you. That's really flattering to hear it. But thank you, guys. I'm gonna get going. All right.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
Take
good
care.
Night.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You guys have a good night.
You too. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Well, he was all kinds of awesome.
He was all kinds of awesome. That was really cool. So, Hamish, we got a PSA.
I love it.
You want to read it?
Yeah, you want 2 or 3?
Give me 3.
All right. If you're in or around Atlanta on March the 31st, come to the Day of the Juice Beer Festival. There will be mead, Superstition Meadery, Melavino Meadery, B-Craft Meadery, Honest Abe Mead and Cider, Ettua Meadery and Cider, Slim Picking Cider and Mead, and a few secret things. Wow, that's quite the rollout. So on March 31st, if you are in Atlanta, get yourself down to Day of the Juice Beer Festival.
And that's at dayofthejuice.com. That'll have all the specs, and you can buy tickets there.
Cool.
Yeah. Sounds like fun. Something nice to do on the last day of the month, which was, Saturday, so. And so that was fun. I enjoyed that. So let's Mazer Cup and AMMA Conference. We were all there.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was awesome.
Definitely.
I was really impressed with the spread of the meads. The ones that I tasted, most of them were pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
The competition was pretty stiff. So big shout out to anybody who took a medal. Dude, you have no idea how hard you had to work to get that.
I think some of them had to be perfect scores, didn't they?
Some of them had to be perfect scores.
There were some 50s. There were some 50s. One guy had a double 50. Jeremy Bolts, I think.
Tom Reppus had a double 50.
Tom Reppus as well.
Yeah, he did.
Did he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
So that's
crazy.
That is crazy.
I remember last year or the year before was the first time that anybody that was around, you know, in the buzz, remembered somebody getting a single 50. And unfortunately, the poor guy, I felt so bad for him. He scored a 50, but because they felt it was in the wrong category, they didn't push him forward to win a medal, so they had to send him a score. You got a 50. That's the first time we've ever seen one. Unfortunately, we had to disqualify you from, you know, competing in that particular category because you were outside the parameters that you
I'd be totally chuffed to get a 50 medal or no medal. I'd be like, woohoo! You know, I'd really be excited. I mean, yeah, it's nice to win a medal, but honestly, the 50 and the feedback would be so cool.
Yeah, from a judging point of view, I was really most happy with the improvements in general on the commercial side of things. The commercial mead for me went up at least 20% in quality. There wasn't a single bad mead that I tried, which was really, really, really positive this year.
Nice. Somewhere I said a statement that I had won what I did, but I had hoped for more. And somebody said, "Well, it's your own damn fault. You've been telling everybody what you do and teaching us all how to make, you know, good mead." And I thought, well, how true is that, right?
It's the problem with sharing. You're sharing everything.
I know. It's all good.
Yeah. So since I know you guys at least got to see some of the speakers at the conference, do you want to speak to that? Because I didn't get to see any of them. I have to wait for the videos.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, no way.
I didn't get to see a single one.
I'll speak to that. I don't remember the fellow's name, but I personally, and this is not to diminish anything else that anyone else spoke on by any means. Vicky, you'll know his name, I'm sure. He was I believe the information that he taught us was what his master's degree.
Oh, that's Jack Twiley, yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God, I just loved him. His information was tremendous, and I'm really excited to know that he'll come back next year, or at least after I spoke with him after the conference, or that day and the day after. Sounds like he'll be coming back next year to bring, we all had some questions. He said that's something that we're still working on, and it sounds like he'll be bringing that back next year, which might be what he turns in to earn his PhD. But I enjoyed a lot of the stuff there, but just for me personally, with the science piece that he brought to the table, it was fabulous, and I just loved that to no end.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I totally geeked out on that. That was amazing.
I know there's a lot of people who are looking forward to getting the speaker deck for that, because his professor approved publication of the speaker deck. Basically took out, I think, 1 or maybe 2 slides. So, the vast majority of it's going to be in there. Because, I mean, he's still going for his master's. He hasn't stood for his master's yet. This is his final project. So, so there are bits that are still secret.
Well, and he hasn't got all of his information yet. So when he comes back next year, he'll be able to present all of his results finalized, which is going to be really awesome.
And if you'll remember, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I am, that he said that he was working late the night before his presentation to put all together a bunch of the, numeric values and whatnot that he didn't even come to Denver with. So. Yeah,
his grad students were working on it overnight, and he was putting it together in the wee hours. It was amazing. It came together the way it did.
Yeah.
That was a very, very good. That was my favorite, I think, for the conference for sure.
I also was really, I really enjoyed Tom Rippus's what to expect in your first year of beekeeping. Now, there was like 4 of us in the room, so it was sort of just a sit-down discussion with some slides in the background, but that was really nice too. I quite enjoyed that. I took a lot of notes on that.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the sour comparison where there were some 18 different souring yeasts applied to the same base, so there were 18 different meads, of which, there were a couple that were absolutely horrid, and there were a few that were really, really good. And the important thing about this comparison of all the different yeasts is that all this data's been collated and held together for what each yeast did to this particular type of honey and this particular style of ferment. But what I really liked is with the right souring yeast, it didn't taste sour, but it just added just enough acid that it really made it pop with this really nice fruity flavors that accentuated the honey a lot without really giving you. I would never have declared it as a sour if I was putting it in a competition. Let's just put it that way.
And that was Carolyn Peeball's presentation. She's actually going to be writing a paper about that for the AMMA journal.
Yeah, that was.
Well, she got the grant for that, right?
She did. Awesome, yeah, she was the winner of the research grant from the AMMA.
And she did a damn good job getting those out. I tell you what, there was a lot of different meats to do a side by side and bottle them all up and prep them all and bring them all in and keep them all labeled and understood. And yeah, that was it was really, really cool to go through that. On the same note, the other one I really enjoyed was Carvin's
fruit. The fruit one?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, fruit meads of when he added the fruit, whether he added all up in primary, whether he added in secondary, whether he added half, whether he did what he calls a staggered fruit addition.
I really wished I'd gotten a chance to see that. How did they taste?
Very different, which was quite surprising.
Cool.
And, there was possibly 60 people in the room, and 3 people were actually able to pick out which one was which correctly of all the 60 people. So it was a little surprising to most people as to which technique generated the best result with that particular Marionberry that he was using.
Well, I guess it just brings out that it's worth experiment. Everything you do, it's worth experimenting.
Yeah, because you just never know what you're going to get. I mean, that's the thing. There's so many variations, so many possibilities.
And you never know what's going to be best for your honey and for your fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the take home I got from him from Carvin was don't get stuck in your ways. No way is the right way. And if you're going to change an ingredient, you need to do all your testing again.
Yeah.
So, change your berry, change your sweetness, whatever like that. Now look again at all your yeasts. You could look again at how you add your fruit, whether you add it in advance or just the juice or afterwards or whatnot. It's if you ever change an ingredient, you're gonna have to revise that recipe with all your full testing again because it's never predictable.
Yeah, that's really cool. Dang, I wish I'd been the ones that I missed not being able to see the most were the ones that had tastings because I really would like to have. Did any of you guys make it to the Dutch Gold varietal honey and mead comparisons?
I did not.
Yes.
Nor did I, but I tried all the honeys at his table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he had
Sergio, which was awesome.
And then Sergio made traditionals from each of those honeys.
Oh.
And then the leftovers went up to Carvin's room on Friday night? Friday night. Yeah, Friday night. Pretty sure.
I was running out of drinking room on Friday night.
I didn't say I was so busy and then so tired and then so busy and then so tired. It's like all the days started to run together after a while.
I can't remember which day's which.
Mm-hmm. It was all fun.
It really
though.
is a long week. For sure. Then, we started Monday night, in Denver. We had all the early comers come to a party that the Denver Mead Group hosted, and so a lot of us started, Monday afternoon.
If I hadn't been running back to the airport, if I hadn't been running back and forth to the airport so much on Monday, I'd have joined you down there. But boy, by the time
it wasn't my fault.
It wasn't. No, you didn't come until Tuesdays or Monday night, whenever it was. Yeah. Anyway, so
I totally understand it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I was just making the point, though. It's a really long week.
It is long, yeah.
And as you guys know, when you're actually judging a competition, that's a lot of work. It's not just, you guys are so lucky you get to sit down and drink 60 good meads a day. It's a lot of
Yeah,
damage.
no, that's a hard job.
Well, and after 2
Yes, it
days
is.
of that, I mean, I literally will get home, and I don't want to have any more mead for a while because I'm about meaded out.
I know.
And I know people
Yep,
go,
for
"Oh,
sure,
that
no.
can never happen." It's like, yeah,
Oh,
it
yes.
could, yeah,
Yeah,
it
right.
could.
Yeah, we that supper we had on Sunday when everyone got together. Yeah, that was a Zinfandel night. That was not a mead night.
Oh, it's totally, yeah. I think I drank water that night, but the dinner sure was good. And the snowflakes the size of your head were just awesome. And the
Yeah, it
pictures
was
from
really
Hamish,
awesome.
who was outside going, "It's snowing, dancing around."
Yes,
Everyone's
the
running
Aussie
inside
went and got
first,
snowed
and I'm
on.
like running outside to see.
It
if I
snowed
can
here
get
again last night, and it's going to snow again tonight.
Oh, wow. Well, we got snow night before last, and today was 38 and raining, and tomorrow it's going to be 75 degrees. So, welcome to North Carolina.
Yeah. We're getting snow right now, but it'll probably be gone in the morning.
Yeah, it's going to be that time of year. So, for once in our lives, we're going to try to wind up not being way too over long. We're only 5 minutes long right now.
That's almost a record.
Yeah, I know, right? So, I hope you guys, everybody out there enjoyed the little departure from our normal operating procedures into the adventure into cider. And if there's a lot of interest in that, we'll venture over there again. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know much about cider making.
Well, we can also venture into wines and beers, too.
Yeah, and we could venture into wines and beers, too. So I got no problem with that. I think that'd be fun. But it was just an interesting. Bobby suggested Chris, in case you're wondering how I came up with the New York cider maker. It was Bobby who found Chris and introduced us and suggested it was a good idea and gave me a bottle of his iced cider and then said, "You need to have him on the show." So Bobby was right.
Iced cider's amazing. There's a place around Montreal here that makes an iced cider that I've had that's just freaking awesome.
Well, the stuff from Eden in Vermont I loved.
I don't think I've ever had anything that was iced that I didn't thoroughly enjoy.
Well, yeah, okay, good point.
Yeah, I've even figured out how to fake it with wine kits.
Right? Yeah. So I would just like to add one thing for the listeners out there. This show really, we do this because we want to fill in the blanks for you guys. And so it'd be perfect if we could hear from you, if you can contact Vicki or any of the others of us as well. Let us know ideas that you want to do for shows, or if you have somebody that think would be an outstanding guest for our show. We really want to try to do this for your sake, not for our own, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we learned just as much as you guys do. I mean, tonight it was a roller coaster ride. It was great. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so email gotmead@gotmead.com.
Yes, thank you, Hamish. That's exactly what you need to do. It's we can't think up everything, guys. Come on, get in on this and help us with ideas. Maybe you know somebody locally that we just totally should have on the show. I mean, let us know.
Luke has a really good question on the live chat. How can a person avoid entering a mead in the wrong category? The BJCP only spells out so much. Would hate to make a 50-point mead that was in the wrong category.
The problem with that is that the competition can't tell you what category to enter with your mead because that violates the double-blind privacy of the comp. So it's difficult because, we get the Mazer Cup used to get that all the time, and I'm sure they still do. Of people going, well, I'm making a blah, 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 blah. Where should I enter that? And they're like, we can't know. Please don't ask because we know. Please, you can't know. They have to go with the category that the producer chooses and not make judgment calls on that. And there's been some debate over, well, yeah, but, they could move it like on the fly during the comp if the judges do it. But that's up to the comp to decide how they're going to handle that type of situation. And it's really, that adds a whole nother layer of work that, the comp may or may not be able to handle,
Yeah, especially if that category has already been judged, been pushed to best of show, all of that sort of thing. It's not impossible. So it is a very difficult thing. And I was really hoping, as this became more of an issue this year, a lot more people were trying to work out what to do and everything like that. It'd be nice if there was a separate advisory body that had nothing to do with the Mazer Cup directly, who also weren't judging. and it's something I want to bring up with the AMMA and see if they have someone who's not judging who would be happy to consult on such issues, where you could send questions like, I've got a this and a this, and I've made it with this, but you can't really taste this, but I've got that, and it's got this, so can I put it here, or should it be there, kind of question. I personally have always had
be a really good
experience with my own competitions that I know where to put it.
You should send
I can just read the descriptions. But
the home governing committee would be able to look at that and see if they think that would be something good to do. That because they're when they come online, and we're in nominations right now. But when the voting happens in 2 weeks and they set up their first committee, they're really going to have one of the things that they'll kind of have some jurisdiction over is things with competitions, at least with the home part. I don't know if there'll be just comps all over, or if it's just home part. But they will definitely have major input on helping our members to better understand what the different bits are, what the varietals are, what the categories are, things like that, and help them have a better understanding so that they can figure that out. But what that's going to look like is going to depend on the board and the committee,
of course,
the home governing committee, and decide how they want to do that or if they want to do that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, definitely.
Well, even just sweetness levels, it's a little hard to judge sometimes whether you should be in like. Well, even if you do, sometimes there's a perception that's different.
Well, then that's on the judge at that point.
And especially if you're just borderline, because the judge isn't going to measure; it's going to be what it tastes like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
right.
the one time I did get to taste things was when somebody the one where they took a base mead and then they added acidity and then they back sweetened, and that one was really informative as to how it can change the same mead just by changing that, and like the perception of sweetness was vastly different on all three. I'm not sure how different the specific gravity was, but the perception was very different.
I can take a 1022 mead, and by adding oak to it, I can dry it out so that the perception would say it's 10.5, 10.6, somewhere in there, and yet it's still a 1020 something mead. And so that's one of my secrets to making dries. Make it a semi, so you get the big nose on the honey, you get the lush volume on the mouth, you get the nice legs on the wall, and if you're using adjuncts, you get a good expression of that as well. And then take a mild oak that doesn't give you a lot of oak fingerprint and dry it out with that only, so it changes the perception, and yet you still get all the benefits from having a semi-dry instead of a dry.
Right, but the thing is, though, is from a drinking standpoint, that's awesome. But if you took that self-same mead and entered it as a dry, because it tastes dry, and then a perceptive judge says, but this isn't dry. I mean, yes, it's got lovely, lush mouthfeel and great legs, and and has all this great tannin and everything. At the same time, it's still a semi-sweet, wrong category. Gosh, it's a 50. We can't push it forward. And then
when you put it in the when you put it in the category it's supposed to be, someone else tastes it and says, I can't push this because it's too dry.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with subjectivity, is that not every judge is equally experienced. That's why you always want to pair experienced judges with less experienced judges, so that there's always somebody on the table who is versed in that sort of thing.
And we went over this in depth last year at one of the comps that I was helping at, and at least at that point, it was determined that once something has moved on into the mini boss or beyond, you cannot take and go measure the gravity to see if it fits in a certain sweetness category. It's solely based on perception.
Yeah, that's very true. Sorry, I was just typing at the
Sure,
Yeah, typing and trying to talk at the same time. Not very good at that. I think that we've talked with the various people at the BJCP. Of course, we've even had the BJCP here. They are always open to refinements of their descriptions or suggestions to new categories or separating categories or what have you. So don't be afraid to talk to the BJCP and say, hey, This is what I did. This is what your description says. It's a little confusing about here, here, and here. So, don't be afraid to email them either. I mean, for the moment, yeah, they're the ones that have the mead descriptions, and I'm hoping that as the AMMA goes forward, and especially once the Home Governing Committee gets going, that we'll be able to help them supplement and expand that to be more clear and more straightforward for people that are kind of coming from inside the mead world rather than, coming from outside in the beer world. So, in answer to your question, Luke, right now it's kind of on the person making the mead. However, there are ways to get more information, and part of that could be, just taking it to your brew club and asking them to help you.
Well, or two. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
Luke, you can also don't do this right before a competition.
Yeah, don't.
But if you have something that you're curious and don't understand where to place it, ask on our Facebook groups or on the Got Mead forum.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, once you get maybe a little bit more comfortable with the style guidelines, it doesn't seem near as confusing as it may have once did when you first start to get kind of familiar with that. It gets easier as you look and go, oh, yeah, okay, that makes more sense now.
Sometimes it does, yeah.
Right. I know. I still feel like I'm learning. I think part of the success that certain people have in entering their meads and competitions is knowing how to play the competition game, so to speak. And I think that I've made mistakes in how I entered things. And I don't know at the time if it would have cost me, any hardware. And, those things are nice, but it's certainly not the end of the day for sure. But I can also say this, nowadays, just a single point or two could be pretty significant in how far you go. You'd be surprised how many 42s or 43s or 44s you might find in a big competition like at the Mazer Cup. And once those get pushed, it's no longer about the score, guys. It's about what your judges taste and think, I like this one better than that one. And so,
yeah, at that point, it's a beauty contest.
That's right. And we're at a point now where if you can gain a little small margin here and gain a little bit of a margin there, those, 3 or 4 or 5 little tiny pieces that all on their own might not seem like it's very significant. I'm starting to feel like it's now as good as people are getting, and those little small fractions that might make just a fraction of a difference might be 2 points at the end of the day, and that might push you into the medal round versus going home with the score sheet in your hand. And we can also answer another thing, Luke. A drier mead's probably never going to do well against a sweeter mead in the same category. It's just most people are more inclined to a sweeter mead than a drier mead. And I think a lot of people don't have a whole lot of experience tasting dry meads. And so I would say if you're on the fence and you're saying
palate fatigue better too.
Well, of course,
That's
I really, boy, we had the worst category you could have the last day of the competition, and there was just myself and one other gal that I call my friend now. We had 14 meads that were dry fruit and spice, and we were so shot out by them that it was just a struggle to even fill out the comp sheets. And I talked to some of the people in, the governing body in MCI after the fact, but it certainly depends on a lot of things. But I really feel like, well, for instance, I think if we all judge the competition this week and next week, and you guys can please speak to this as well, but I think that your point scores may vary a little bit, but I still think whether they vary a little bit or not, and maybe one set of table judges are a little bit more lenient than another set that might be a little less willing to give away points. I still believe at the end of the day, with all of those human variances involved, I think that the better meads probably will get pushed almost all the time.
Yeah.
What's
I have
pushed
pushed ones that were out of category because they were so outstandingly in front of everything else in the category. There was just no way I could see to not do it. It's a tough decision,
well, and if you would have,
but
yeah. And if you read the packet that we got as judges, they even said that you should only deduct 1 or 2 points for something that minor, where you shouldn't disqualify it out of a category, and you shouldn't bang
but
a
if
big
it's
team because
if it's running neck and neck with something that is properly categorized, the thing that is properly categorized is going to win out ahead of the thing that is equally good but improperly categorized.
That's right.
And that's
we could take that even farther. If let's say we have 2 45s and they're exactly the same, but one's crystal clear, it's been polished, and the other one's a little bit hazy, guess who's going to get the winner?
Yeah. Because that's look and feel. Yeah. Well, but that's part of judging. Whether that sells great or not doesn't matter. Oh my God, we're like 20 minutes over.
That's my point. It's the very small pieces now that I think are going to start equaling a bigger distance in the long run.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and as we see, we're going to see more and more experienced mead judges too, and that's going to make a big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
And, so that as time moves forward.
Sorry, Vicki, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, if it's only the sweetness level, if you're putting it in 1 or 2 and you're going down into if you're going up into the sweet category and it's on the border, I would say you're probably going to do better by putting it down in the drier category. Because it just seems like the sweets win out more against the dries if they're in the same category.
You're probably right.
I really think that's true, unfortunately. So to answer your question, just ask people before the competition starts.
Long before the competition starts.
Yeah.
Also, volunteer for a competition. Taste lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I was talking with Carvin a while ago, and some of us are fortunate enough that we might drink 200 different meads a year. I mean, it's only common sense if you're one of those people that have that opportunity, and you probably won't have that opportunity unless you get involved in serving in some form or fashion at a competition. I mean, it only makes sense that somebody that's tasted 200 meads last year is going to have a little bit better idea of that whole sensory perception piece on the mead world than somebody that's had 3 or 4 of their own and maybe 2 others in some piece of crap bottle they bought off the shelf somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I just did it, didn't I, Hamish? So that's just my point. Drink as much mead as you can. Make as much mead as you can. Get involved as deeply as you can, and have fun doing it.
What upcoming events have we got, Vicki?
We have just a couple because I didn't have the chance to dig up any more. Because if you guys had sent them to me, then I wouldn't have to go hunting for them. All right, March 31st, we've got the Day of the Juice Beer Festival that Hamish read the PSA for earlier. dayofthejuice.com. And on April 21st, we've got the Winemaker's Shop Mead Competition. And that is at winemakershop.com/mead-competition. Check those out. And they're also linked on the show page as well. So next week, I have no idea who we're going to have yet because, I was like busy and then it was gone. And now I'm just like getting back into this. So, we've got some people that we're lining up. And we'd love to, see who do you want to have on here, and it doesn't always have to be mead people. We had fun talking to Chris tonight with cider, so excuse me. Sorry, I just almost sneezed there. Yeah, sorry. So that's what we've got for tonight, and we'll let you guys know once we line up some more folks and get some more people in the queue. Sorry, I just got a frog in my throat like all of a sudden there. I hate when that happens right when I'm in the middle of the show. So, yeah, that's
better
all.
At the end than in the middle.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's like, at least I didn't, inhale water or something and start gagging or something. That would be really bad. But, yeah, so, let us know what you think. Gotmead@gotmead.com. If you know somebody who just needs to be on here, let me know. There's always new stuff, new people, new toys, new tools, whatever. We are going to be working on getting some of the yeast manufacturers on here going forward, and we're working on that. So, maybe get Scott Labs and possibly even Lalvin in here. So, to see what they would have to say. That would be cool. And, and some of that other kind of stuff. And I'm thinking maybe we need to get, I think maybe we'll have Evan from Dutch Gold come on, talk varietals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Nice.
His talk at the conference was really good, and I think it would be fun to have him on the show and, and just talk about the different varietals, and we can get that conversation going. So we'll start kind of maybe focusing in a little on some of the bits, the ingredients and techniques and whatnot, and doing some of that. So that's all I got. What about you guys?
I'm good.
No, I've got to get back home before I can work out what's going on.
It's like I think I'm in New York, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all haze.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
All right, man. We'll see you guys next week.
Good
Night, everyone.
All right, night.